Welcome to No Longer Conformed. I'm Erik Garthe, and we are studying relationships, interacting with others. In this session, we'll be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 10 to 22, parenting God's way. When parents ignore the instructions of the Bible, destruction is on its way. The story of Eli and his two sons is one of disaster following years of compromise. All three men died the same day. Look at our text, 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 10 to 22. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 32,000 foot soldiers. And also the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. Then a man of Benjamin ran from the battle line the same day and came to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. Now when he came, there was Eli sitting on a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told it, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he said, "What does the sound of this tumult mean?" And the man came quickly and told Eli. Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were so dim that he couldn't see. Then the man said to Eli, "I am he who came from the battle, and I fled today from the battle line." And he said, "What happened, my son?" So the messenger answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been a great slaughter among the people. Also, your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." And then it happened, when he made mention of the ark of God, that Eli fell off the seat backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, due to be delivered, and when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and gave birth. For her labor pains came upon her, and about the time of her death, the woman who stood by her said to her, "Do not fear, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer, nor did she regard it. And then she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark has been captured." Let's consider three concerns that impact godly parenting that can be witnessed in the family of Eli the priest. First, the enemy of godly parenting is compromise. 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord. There are some areas where compromise is not that big a deal. Someone wrote, if your toddler loves green beans but won't eat broccoli, hey, take what you can get. And as a child grows older, some rules change of necessity. Now, a 4-year-old might need 8 p.m. bedtime. But by the time that same child becomes a teenager, it's the parents who are ready for bed by 8. Some compromise is just a part of life. However, when it comes to biblical principles, compromise is not an option. Eli's sons didn't get to where they were overnight. They didn't wake up one day and decide to be delinquents. And Eli was 98 years old when he died. Just kind of a review of the lives of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas, his sons. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 13 and through 15. And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come with a three-pronged flesh hook in his hand while the meat was boiling. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and the priest would take for himself all that the flesh hook brought up. So they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who sacrificed, "Give meat for roasting to the priest, for he will not take boiled meat from you, but raw." Listen, they were stealing from the sacrifices. The priests were supposed to randomly stab boiled meat, but Eli's sons wanted better cuts. They took meat before it was cooked and prepared it to their taste. Over the years, starting with what they put on their plate, Hophni and Phinehas became addicted to selfish satisfaction. But this wasn't just a physical issue, it was spiritual. They were stealing from God. And verse 14 records they did this openly, without shame. It says, "So they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there." They also corrupted the servants who ministered along with them. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 16. "And if the man said to him, 'They should really burn the fat first, then you may take as much as your heart desires,' he would answer them, 'No, but you give it now, and if not, I will take it by force.'" 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 22. "Now Eli was very old, and he heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle of meeting." This is the only reference of women serving at the entrance of the tabernacle or the temple, and it's a very negative mention. Eli's sons were involved in much sexual sin. The sins of Eli's sons came back to affect the old priest's compromised life as well. 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 18, again. "Then it happened when he made mention of the ark of God that Eli fell off the seat backwards by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy." Eli was, quote, heavy. That means Eli also probably began to eat meat stolen from the sacrifices. Imagine, all his life, Eli ate boiled roast. And then one evening, he caught the smell of a T-bone sizzling on Hophni's grill. After years of saying no, Eli gave in to the temptation. He enjoyed a steak. By the end of his life, the priest was weighed down by his appetite, and Eli died a failure spiritually, enjoying the taste of sin. Compromise is the enemy of godly parents today. Homosexuality as a valid lifestyle choice is a message of entertainment today. The message of sexual promiscuity among teenagers is an often repeated theme of television shows and movies. If parents don't stay involved, teenagers can get in serious trouble very quickly. In the battle between godliness and evil, godly parents must hold their ground. Which brings us to another point. The enemy of godly parenting is compromise, and second, parents are responsible to train their children. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. The Lord said, "In that day I will perform against Eli all that I've spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them." God sent a prophet to tell Eli to get his family's act together. You can read it, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 27 to 36. It was a warning given in love. God wanted the priest to correct his course because he was heading for disaster. Eli knew his sons were doing wrong, but like so many parents, he didn't act to deal with them. He spoke to them, but did nothing. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 23 to 25. So Eli said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. No, my sons, this is not a good report that I hear. You make the Lord's people transgress. If one man sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him?" Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them. When Eli didn't act beyond just words, his compromise led to more compromise, and eventually, God brought it all to a day of disaster. If you're a parent, understand these points. Words of warning are not enough. God expects you to take action to correct sin problems. And even if you personally choose to live for God, your children may not follow his ways. Samuel grew up under the care of Eli and became a father himself. And ironically, his sons were just like Eli's sons. But Samuel was different from Eli. He agreed with the leaders of Israel that his sons' compromises eliminated them from leading the country. Samuel never received a word by God's prophets about his sons. He did his part, warned his sons, and stood against compromise. God expects parents today to be people not of words only, but also of action. He expects you to do whatever it takes to present your family well before him. The enemy of godly parenting is compromise. Parents are responsible to train their children. And third, children are eventually responsible for their choices. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 through 5. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, but his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Both Eli and Samuel trained their sons with worship of God and the written words of Scripture. However, all four sons chose ungodly paths for their lives. Eli's sons paid the price of death for their sins. Samuel's sons were spared the same punishment because their father removed them from national leadership once they proved to be corrupt. Don't misunderstand an important point. While godly parenting involves diligent training and avoiding compromise, children are responsible for their own choices in life. We cannot blame our parents for the problems that come because of our sins. The choices we make have compromise, have consequences. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 to 9. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that will he also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Watching an ungodly child grow up is a rough experience for any parent, but the Bible is full of people who were headed down the path of Eli's sons, of Samuel's sons, and who heard God's warning, heeded God's words, and changed their ways. David recovered from a deadly mistake and became a greater man, seeking after God's own heart. Kings, Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa all saw evil and took action to correct it. And there were also Simon Peter, Zacchaeus, the thief on the cross. They met Jesus and their lives were transformed. You think about all that and you have a great day.